What do the students want? Any doubt about the interior method of assessing this should be dispelled when I say that I only have to look over A. Some 150,000 letters received from many countries over 15 years, and B. What has transpired in almost innumerable interviews over that time, and C. Press accounts and investigations of the Sufic cults which have sprung up more or less deliberately in response to a demand for Sufi knowledge, or which have received fresh life since my publication of the Sufis in 1964. Briefly, the would-be student's head is full of assumptions. I do not mean to say that he should have no preconceptions about Sufism or anything else, but his or her behavior will very frequently show that it is not just a matter of assumptions which may be added to, forgotten, or replaced by better facts. The assumptions in the minds of the majority of would-be students in the Sufi field indicate without any doubt not only an underlying desire to join a cult, but a model of what that cult should be like. In other words, the student generally comes to the Sufi in order to have his assumptions reinforced and to join the kind of community or school which, often unknowingly, exists in blueprint in his mind. He may be completely unaware of this. It does not take long to elicit the pattern. I often use a tape recorder for this purpose. What happens is this. Instead of asking what he should do and what he should not do, or whether he should do anything at all, the applicant in the course of a conversation wants to know what it will cost him, how much time he will have to spend on it, when the meetings are, where he should live, what kind of job, if any, he should have, and so on. If he is told, "It will take you 20 years," he compares this with the model, and may well ask whether he cannot manage to do it in a shorter time. Finally, by questioning, we find out how much time he will be prepared to give. Similarly, without giving away the reason for the questioning, we find out that he will pay, say, $10 a week, but not 20. He will give 3 hours a day, but not more. He will not read books, but will listen to tapes. He will join a group, but not study alone, and so on. When this kind of thing happens, I may summarize it all and tell him, "We have determined that you want a community within 35 miles of your place of residence, which will give you solace from your present problems, which has exercises but not prayers, gives you constant encouragement and a great deal of criticism, and which promises power, fulfillment, or happiness. You do not need Sufi study, you need such and such a cult." There is always a suitable cult, since cults, social groupings, have almost always come into being as a response to needs of this kind. The foregoing, it will be noted, is a psychological method of determining what someone wants. Its main value is to show when we are not dealing with a would-be student, but a would-be customer or client, someone who has a framework and is seeking something to fit it. So in cases such as these, our job has merely been to clear away the underbrush. It is my hope that with the growth of mass information about mental models of this kind, we will no longer have to go through this kind of procedure, because it is one which someone, by means of self-questioning, or with the help of a psychologist or even an interested friend, could do for himself, leaving us to get on with the business of working with people who are genuinely interested. To be genuinely interested, of course, means that the person's basic needs for comfort, repetitiousness, sense of the profound and of being involved in meaningful things, his socio-psychological needs, shall either be stabilized by membership of something which keeps these desires engaged, or else that he is sufficiently autonomous not to need this study as social support therapy. If you read Sufi writings, you will find that much time is given to liberating people from these needs. Other parts of Sufi literature are addressed to people who no longer have such needs, or who have stabilized them by membership of social entities where these intakes, these nutritions, are supplied. Some people nowadays, it is amusing to note, have seized upon manuals from remote historical times formerly current among Sufis, which effectively supply a social context, a series of maxims and ways of conduct, in order to provide a stable base from which the would-be students could proceed to Sufism. In these days, such a thing is not necessary, because the development of so many human organizations of a social, cultural, literary, scientific, and other kind provides such formats, and it is only necessary to be integrated into one or more of these to be able to give one's liberated attention to Sufi studies. The most that reliance upon medieval Conduct of Dervishes books can do is to create, as are now coming into plentiful being, new communities admirably suited to the atmosphere of the 13th century, or thereabouts. Luckily, mostly due to the proliferation of human societies in this era, there are enough well-adjusted people already meshed with their organizations for us to be able to find relatively numerous individuals without having to set up alternative tribes or societies. These are the ones to whom our writings and other materials are normally addressed. New research materials are also appearing, relating Sufi tradition to current psychological and social research. The quasi-Sufi activities of the cultists, and the almost sterile ones of the limited scholars too, have their advantages for us. They hive off numbers of people who would overwhelm us if they were all to apply for Sufi instruction. And they too are satisfied. Both lots believe that they are right, and derive pleasure from this fancy. The fresh adaptation of Sufi action leading towards the Sufi experience of which I speak, which has attracted so many and enraged others, is nothing more nor less than successive adaptation of practical activity towards the same end in new circumstances. This is, of course, just the same sort of adaptation which can be seen in Sufi activities in the past, and which accounts for the seeming differences and undoubted variety of ancient Sufi methods, postulates, and organizations. Sufi sages throughout the ages have always confused outward students by claiming that all Sufis are essentially one, that all Sufism is the same, whether practiced by means of this technique or that, whether by the Shias, e.g. the Bektashis, or Sunnis, e.g. the Qadiris, nominally and often literally opposed schools within Islam. In the Table Talk of Rumi, died 1273, entitled Fihi ma Fihi, as in many other places in the literature, we find that many non-Muslims were among those who understood his teaching best. Someone asked Rumi how it was that a whole group of Greek Christians, unbelievers, could be appropriately affected by his Sufism, when only one Muslim in 1,000 could understand it. Rumi explained, with a plenitude of allegories, that externals were not Sufism, and that opinion and dogmas were not the point of it at all. The confusion is in the paths, not in the objective. And, of course, in Aflaki's record of Rumi's work, we have the famous account of how he had disciples of all origins. When he died, multitudes of Christians and others followed his bier. Someone asked one of them why he should weep for a Muslim, and he said, "He is the Moses, the David, the Jesus of the age. We are his followers, his disciples. This is why we weep." So here we have Rumi in the 13th century, communicating Sufi understanding to non-Muslims better than he can to 1 in 1,000 Muslims. He has dominated the communications gap, not an easy thing to do. It is small wonder that Sufis have again and again come under suspicion by pedestrian minds for this ability, which such minds not only lack, but are generally almost unable even to conceive. So difficult is this problem for superficial thinkers to solve that it is generally held that it was not until Al-Ghazali, died 1111, that it was proved, through his work, that Sufism was compatible with Islam and was an inner function of religion itself. Ghazali is credited with having established the acceptability of Sufism within Islam. Ghazali, of course, was working for his time, as well as for such succeeding generations as might contain people who would feel the need to question the validity of Sufism. In the Islamic world, there are still people who aver that Sufism is not from Islam, or, if it is, that it is not necessary, since the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet exist. They can only be reassured by the arguments of Ghazali. This question of the attunement of the teaching to the culture of the time is most strikingly demonstrated in the work of Ibn Arabi, the Spanish Sufi, known as the Greatest Sheikh, who died in Damascus in 1240. His book Fusus al-Hikam, Facets of Wisdom, takes the teachers as Adam, Seth, Noah, Enoch, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Joseph, Jesus, Solomon, Moses, and Muhammad, and treats them as concentrators upon various modes of awareness and teaching. The fact that he chooses historical or semi-historical individuals as the focus of his work indicates, of course, among other things, the Sufi awareness of time, place, and people, the cultural environment, as we would call it today, in certain senses. In this he follows the tradition of Islam, that of the theory of supersession in revelation, which is also acknowledged in other faiths, including Christianity and Judaism, but which is, among Sufis, strongly stressed. Of course, Arabi's work is in many respects addressed to the communities of his day, and its wholesale adoption as a sort of holy writ by sometimes well-meaning but often unregenerate amateurs succeeds only in maintaining an Ibn Arabi cult. Arabi, in his Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, the Interpreter of Desires, wrote a most remarkable book to show both Sufi truths and the fact that many religious people could not understand religion if it were presented to them in a form to which they were unaccustomed. This is one of the most daring and noteworthy events in public Sufi history. The book reads like a love poem, and Arabi's statement that it was mystical in content was attacked by a theologian who claimed that he probably adopted this device in order to protect himself from the imputation that he, a man famous for religion and piety, composed poetry in the erotic style. Ibn Arabi himself wrote an explanatory commentary, which was read out in the presence of his critic and other divines. When the critic heard this read, he said that he would never in future doubt the good faith of any Sufis who should assert that they attached a mystical signification to the words used in ordinary speech, and the use by Sufis of all manner of materials to convey their meanings thenceforward became well established. Or at least, people could always refer to Arabi's teaching event to explain why they were working with materials which the devout could not understand. But a lot of education is still needed. There is at least one contemporary scholar who counts the number of times I myself use the word God and judges me on it, so he says, although I might well have doubted this statement from a Western thinker had I not seen it in print, I do confess. No doubt that since I have used the word in some of my books many more times than Arabi in his Tarjuman, I can be assessed by such observers as this, as that much more important even than the greatest sheikh. The attunement of the teaching to the facts of time, place, and people is a vital clue in the study of Sufism. It should always be remembered that in Sufi matters there are clearly two forms of study. One, about Sufism, which means trying to familiarize oneself with the literature or to concentrate on a form of it, or on concepts and practices which most likely have been tailored for completely different conditions. And two, in Sufism, which means that the things studied should be those which will enable the student to become a Sufi, which includes the inexpressible Sufi experience.